All right, welcome back to the PagerDuty live stream. If you're joining us today for our panel on event-driven automation, we can see your comments if you are on Twitch or LinkedIn. We cannot see comments on the YouTube live. If you have anything you'd like to ask us about later, you can always join our forums there, community.pagerduty.com, and we will be able to answer your questions there. So yeah, why don't we start out? Most you guys have been on the stream before, but just to remind everybody, I'm Mandy Walls, DevOps advocate here at PagerDuty, and then we'll go around the ring. Frank, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience out there?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Frank. I'm a principal product manager here on the AI Ops team, and I primarily focus on our event orchestration products. So I'm super excited to talk about today's session. This is like what I do every day. It's a core to my product, so this will be a fun chat.
Awesome. And Sam?
Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Sam Ferguson. I'm a senior product manager on our incident management team. And so I primarily work on our really core products, so incidents, incident workflows, custom fields, and a lot of those pieces. And today I'm excited to talk a little bit about how that all hooks into some of our automation and how you can leverage that to get the most out of event-driven automation.
Sweet. Pekko?
Hi folks, Pekko Karanev, product manager with the automation group within PagerDuty. My area of focus is runbook automation. Previous life, did a lot of observability, tooling, product management, work in the trenches. So happy to be here and excited to talk about this novel approach to operations with event-driven automation.
All right. Well, then let's just level set right there. What is event-driven automation? What should the folks be thinking about when they hear that term? Frank, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So I actually think this is a great way to start. I think this conversation comes up all the time. I will say when I talk about event-driven automation, and I probably say this because event orchestration sits where all of our integration points come in, I see it as sort of the practice of listening to signals coming from observability tools, monitoring tools, basically anything that's telling you like, hey, something's happened that you need to go look at for some reason. If we consider that the event, then it's really all of the automation that goes into making sure that that signal is dealt with. And that could be anything from, ignoring it to looking at some logs to actually having a human get involved. And so automating as much of that, dealing with that signal as possible is how I really see event-driven automation.
Pekko, Sam, anything to add to that?
I'm with Frank on this one. I think in terms of approach, I'm thinking more around like a pipeline of like you're creating a way to handle certain events, associate them with certain actions, incorporate some logic. So really thinking about like, how based on event we can actually respond in a fully automated way. And simply said, but a lot goes into actually making this happen reliably at scale within an organization.
Yeah, and I would just add in too, like based on my background, I spent a lot of time on the one end of that spectrum or one end of that pipeline, which really is like once an incident is already created, how can automation support that response process? And so there's a few pieces of that I think are really critical. One is when that incident is created, and especially those major incidents, that's often when there are responders involved. And so that starts to be that interface between how your automation can actually support the people who are responding to that incident. And there's a few pieces of that I think are really valuable or become important and upfront for customers. One is just how can we remove the manual work? So how can you eliminate those tasks that were otherwise going to be performed by someone responding? Two, how do you make that happen quicker? So how do you eliminate the time that is required to actually respond to these things? And then the third one, which I think sometimes is forgotten, but is just as important when you get to these major incidents, is how do you ensure that the process is followed too? So a lot of organizations have really structured processes for major incident response, for security incident response, et cetera. And automation is a really key critical way to actually ensure that process is followed throughout the life cycle of an incident.
Yeah, so you mentioned incident response. As far as like how this helps folks in that realm, like what are we after? What does it help them accomplish to be thinking about event-driven automation in that context? What are we hoping to help them deal with by automating stuff without like versus the human initiated automation that's also sort of available in some of our systems.
Yeah, and I think that, it's going to depend on what you're looking at. And again, it gets back to like one of the really key things when you're talking about these major incidents or incident response in general is sometimes it's impossible to fully automate everything. And so it's a bit of that crossover. And so you start to see examples where things like automating sending out status updates or making sure there's reminders to do that. Or starting to pull from automation actions and running some automated diagnostics on a cadence. Those are the pieces of things that can really just help support responders when they're actively engaged in an incident. And that it goes a long ways really sitting on top of some of the things like automated remediation or the other pieces that I think Frank and Pecco can speak towards well.
Yeah, and to Sam's point, it's also, depending on the size of the organization, the maturity, there's kind of a spectrum of how much of this event-driven automation gets deployed and managed, right? And it actually may even vary within a company based on the teams that are engaging and their level of comfort of like, hey, do I really want to fully automate this down to remediation, and then involve responders when things haven't worked in the automated way, or vice versa. And we're seeing actually quite a bit of experimentation from both small and large organizations in this space, which is pretty exciting. And to your point about the why, why event-driven automation? Well, we're constantly looking to be more efficient in technology. We're looking to give more time back to people actually doing valuable project work, delivery work versus trying to basically automate some of the operation. So that's one of the why, efficiency. The other one is just responsiveness. So if I have an incident and the clock is ticking, right, I have that 1 hour or 15 minutes to repair things. So the more I can automate, the more I can shrink that time of, whether it's downtime, whether it's, customer satisfaction being impacted. So the more I can take that 1 hour and shrink it down to, 5 minutes, or less, the more positive business impact I'm contributing. So
Yeah,
that's the why, efficiency and, improving kind of the overall service quality.
Sure. Frank, was there something you wanted to add there?
Oh no, I was just gonna. I was agreeing with Pecco. I think that one thing to keep in mind is that automation doesn't just mean remediation. So that idea of you'll see teams looking at the whole spectrum is really important to think about, especially when you're looking at adopting event-driven automation. Is it doesn't just mean you get an event that comes in that says your payment services are down. Organize a bunch of robots to get production back online. We look at it as, step one of automation is figuring out, do you ignore this signal? Do you attempt automated diagnostics? Do you attempt automated remediation? Do you contact a human? And so there's a lot of steps to it. And depending on the quality of that signal coming in and what your teams are trying to accomplish, you could implement all of that, portions of that, little bits from each of those steps to different degrees. And it's really going to depend on your organization and what you're struggling with at the time.
Yeah, excellent. So all of that then is dependent on signals coming in from other places. What does that look like for teams? Like what signals should they be sort of searching for? Because we've all heard like lots of folks are still suffering from alert fatigue. There's a lot of more signal than maybe we need in a lot of places. How do you determine or how do you pare down to the ones that are going to be most impactful to sort of kick off one of these sort of event-driven automations or pipelines or workflows or whatever they would be?
I can take that one. I'll say that when you look at the kinds of signals coming into your system, I think every signal is important. Every event coming in is important. They don't all require a human to be involved, but I think that having all those events coming in helps you paint a picture. And so if you look at a major incident that has been triggered, production didn't suddenly go from running to not running instantaneously. There were tens, dozens, maybe hundreds of events that came in ahead of time. And this is where machine learning can really come in and help you figure out, great, production's down now. Of those, tens or hundreds of events that preceded it, could we have predicted this sooner? if we had all these events coming in, if you're looking at all of them, if you're able to parse them out and interpret what they meant, could we kick off automation ahead of time? And that's another side of the event-driven automation, is getting all those events in and using them to paint that picture before a major incident occurs. One of the things we hear of a lot is, risk mitigation is really important these days. And, when you have a ton of events coming in, obviously your events are growing faster than probably your teams can respond to them. Teams will start ignoring events, and then what you're doing is you're pushing that risk downstream. So the more of those events you aren't listening to, the later you're going to find these major incidents. The riskier those become, the more costly they become. And so, I think all of those signals, all those events are important. And then being able to interpret them and write rules around them and use machine learning to analyze them, so that you're earlying up detection of those things as soon as possible, so that you can trigger automation before production's down.
Yeah, I would also add, so I think it's going to vary organization to organization in terms of what you actually want to pull from those events. But what we often see, and where I think a lot of that value can be introduced for those more critical incidents, is considering what is the information that's important to elevate onto the incident. So what can you pull from those events that really is critical for responders or might be useful downstream? So that's one piece, is just like, what's that context to extract from that treasure trove of information that exists within those events? Then the other piece is thinking about what you can actually do with that information too. So where do you need to, and I think Pekka did a very good job of describing this earlier, like if you imagine the pipeline, like where can you pull from those events to help on the later stages of that pipeline? Whether it be, again, like sending status updates, running diagnostics, just capturing things on the incident. There's a lot of value in that. And so that's where those two pieces come together. And I think that there's a couple things we're actually doing to help make that easier too, which are worth just calling out. So one is I've been partnering really closely with Frank's team, and we're making it so you can use event orchestration to actually extract fields from the inbound event and push them into custom fields on the incident. And so that's one really critical way we're making it easier for you all to actually leverage that event data and get it up onto the incident, where you can surface it to responders in a much easier way. And then the second piece of that that's also coming or planned for the very near future is the ability to kick off workflows based on those custom fields too. And so that starts to create this really nice pipeline where you can pull data from the event, elevate it onto custom fields within an incident, and then kick off further automation using incident workflows in order to do all sorts of things. So maybe conditionally running automation actions, adding responders, changing the priority of the incident. There's a lot that you can then do by tying all of these pieces together through some of the functionality we can provide.
And Mandy, to your point about, I think of the, again, event-driven automation as going beyond alerting, right? So if you're shoving a bunch of data from event sources and then you're just trying to get smarter about how you alert people, you're probably doing it wrong, right? You're not going to win that battle. There's always going to be, alerts waking people up, spuriously, even if they don't need to be woken up to do something, right? Yeah. So I think thinking of the event-driven automation, more around making your organization responsive, to sometimes predictable events and sometimes unpredictable events. And some portion of that needs to involve a human with an alert. And in a great degree, if you do a lot of the thinking and planning and work ahead of time, you can probably save a lot of human hours that way.
Yeah, excellent. So then when you're looking at, let me use the E word. When we're looking at automation and we're looking at the kinds of work that we'd like to do with this kind of automation, is there anything that makes it sort of, I'll say, more enterprise ready or more able to sort of share amongst teams so that folks aren't repeating themselves across an entire department, things that you can, because this is going to be an investment, right? A lot of this stuff is going to take time to create and put together for all these teams, and we want, sort of maybe everybody in the department to benefit from it. How do we think about that in a way that it becomes more of a shareable resource for all these teams? Frank, you got that one?
Yeah, I can start. I think it's going to be a combination of all three of us. What I always tell people is the more you can standardize and templatize, the easier it's going to be. if you can set things up in a central and a global location and have as much common stuff propagated out as possible, that's really where you want to start. I think when you look at, large enterprise deployments for event-driven automation, the first thing people picture in their mind's eye is like, oh my God, this is a lot of work. I have 10,000 developers. Like, how am I going to scale this? And so being able to take as much of the same sorts of things that you're going to do for every single team, setting that up front, and then letting individual teams take on more customized forms of automation downstream, that's going to be a big win. And basically what it means is you want to lower that barrier to adoption. So if you're setting things up centrally, there's no barrier. It's free. Everyone at your organization benefits from automation just by, being in your organization. And then where there is a barrier to entry, you're kind of pushing it down to those teams that are most impacted, that are most benefited by automation. And so it gets a little bit easier to automate it. So maybe that means at that global level, you're doing things like event monitoring, transformations, enrichments, routing, like detecting major incidents, adding custom fields, figuring out what workflows get kicked off downstream based on how your organization deals with that stuff. Then once events actually move into alerts or incidents on a specific service, those teams can figure out the more nitty-gritty things, like, does it need a diagnostic? If so, what's my team's diagnostic? Does it need a specific workflow to trigger? If so, what is my team set up? And that's really where the stuff that Peiko and Sam build comes in, where, again, you can sort of start to templatize that. So I know, Peiko, your team, they've done a lot of work in that space as well.
Yeah, so a lot of what we're seeing with organizations, kind of this, like Frank mentioned, there's usually a team that's kind of setting the standard, driving the maturity in a bigger organization, and they can provide like a library of, these are the common things that we see across the board, and then they help develop new content. But there's still kind of responsibility of the individual teams to take it, customize it, build new stuff that's specific to that team, from a feature function perspective, again, as long as you can delegate control and access, and at enterprise scale, people are not overwhelmed with, necessarily having one workspace for, 10,000 developers, everybody's compartmentalized, then it's easier to manage that both from a central place as well as like to the individual team. And throughout, again, going back to this idea of a pipeline, throughout every segment of the pipeline on this event-driven automation, we've built capabilities for the enterprise to be able to do that, to have central control as well as delegate to the leaf teams that need to do specific services work. But the other thing I'll say is there's kind of what the products and tools do, and then how you use them. And again, we see customers, through different maturity curves. They've completely reached this, really well-greased machine where the central team is really advertising, they're getting feedback, they're building new stuff, versus like new fledgling teams that are just starting. So I think, basically don't underestimate the value of actually building a community around automation within the organization, and just, sharing best practices, having the lunch and learns and all that, just, and PagerDuty is also supporting these efforts as well through, some of our community, workshops and stuff we do. Yeah. So definitely pay attention to that to make things well adopted.
I think Pekka is spot on with that. Internally, we talk a lot about leading by example. And what we see a lot with our enterprise customers, especially, or larger customers, is that really starts with major incidents. It's often figuring out those workflows, figuring out how to automate and set up those pieces around the most critical incidents that are impacting your customers. But then the other piece that I want to call it is automation doesn't have to be hard. There are a lot of things that we're doing to make it easier. And I think that's where, when it gets to democratizing some of this and making it available to a lot of teams, some of that just comes down to having clear examples that you can look at and making it so they're easy starting points. And so, again, kind of like Pekka and Frank have alluded to, even in product, we've made it so there are ways that you can start more quickly. So for incident workflows, for example, it's all low code, no code. And so you can manage it at scale. You can use Terraform, APIs, et cetera, if you need to. But it's also really easy for teams to just jump in, use our builder to set up workflows that can automate some of the core pieces in a really lightweight way. And then we also have templates too. So there's starting points that can sort of demonstrate some of the best practices that we see across our customers in order to, again, give that starting point, make it easier to get going, and eliminate basically some of that intimidation factor or some of the barrier to entry that can sometimes come with automation.
And Sam, to your point, I think, again, back to that community and getting started, like it doesn't have to be grand, right? It doesn't need to solve, world hunger and peace, right? It can start with, hey, we're every week we have to do this recurring thing, and sometimes it's event driven, sometimes it's scheduled. Taking those small steps and just building that automation muscle, and then the greater things happen like over time continuously. And we see some of the most successful customers, follow that pattern, like to get started.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Was like, what are good tasks for teams that are like, oh, this sounds great, but how do you get started? Yeah, it sounds like there's plenty of choice there to get started with the things that are already in the product to get folks rolling. So, yeah, excellent. And I like the idea of like a community of practice, or like hanging out, even just in a Slack channel, or have a lunch and learn one Friday a month to people show off, what they are working on or how they've put some automation together that can help other teams in the department. Sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, one example we use, like starting with something very trivial, like you have these recurring failures, you can fully, deploy event-driven to resolve the first step. Like one of the most common things, like we're running out of disk space. Okay, well,
always.
What does that mean? Like either you go run a script or you run these like 3 or 4 commands. Why do we need to wake somebody up to do that, right? It's not dangerous to do something like that, right? It's just trivial. And another thing is, like, again, building that muscle. It's also building the trust that automation will handle things the way you expect.
Yeah.
Start small, build up.
One thing I'd add, and this is some of the advice that I always give people when they're looking at getting started, is if you're looking at like all of these events coming in and the body of work that you have to deal with all these events, if there's ever situations where you're like, I would rather ignore this event completely than continue to deal with it over and over again, that's a great candidate to start automation with. Because if you're considering ignoring it or automating it, then clearly you're okay with the risk of automating it wrong or using it as something to learn off of. And so I think those are great opportunities as well, where, as Peko said, if it's something trivial, it's something low risk, you're considering you don't have the load to deal with this, you're thinking of getting rid of it completely, automate it, learn from it, build off of it, treat it like a sprint. Like we're doing development, this is sprint 0, you're going to learn, you're going to build on that, and you're going to keep building on that over time and keep growing that practice.
The other thing I'd add, and this sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is automation does not need to mean remediation. So you can start with those low risk areas where you're not trying to remediate the incident fully, but you're trying to think about like, what can we do to help the responders who are already engaging? And so one of the easiest starting points we see for after the incident is created is, okay, maybe you need to set up a Slack channel. Maybe you need an MS Teams meeting going. Get the conference bridge up so people can hop on a call together. All of those little things add up. And again, it gets back to how do you follow the right process when you're responding to major incidents? And so that's one way you can just find that entry point. Before you're starting to really follow the full pipeline to pass information through from events into custom fields, into workflows, and taking all of these more involved steps, it can be easy just to get those basics going. And then again, it gets back to where can it snowball from there? How can you iterate? How can you take the more advanced steps that help you when you start to notice these reoccurring issues or the more high-risk areas that you want to take on?
Yeah. Do you have any advice for folks who have maybe folks who are hesitant about automation on their team, or don't trust it, or aren't sure that it's going to solve what they need, the sort of detractors that might be out there?
I would just get back to, you can start small. Like it doesn't all have to be risky. And this is the stuff that can really save you time. It can save your responders times, and it can make it so the right process is followed. And so ultimately, when it comes to the key value drivers for your business, that's likely the stuff that you all are trying to orient on. And so it can be intimidating, but there's a good starting point. But Peko, I'll let you go.
Yes, Sam, like 2 point. The thinking of it is intimidating, but I've never ever experienced like somebody automating something and then people being mad at them. It's like, why did you automate this like work that we had to do? And all of a sudden everybody's like, oh yeah, thank you very much for, taking out of your time to make a life easier. So obviously don't break stuff, right? But that goes without saying. But yeah, I think it's, to Sam's point, it's like take the step, do something small. People see the value, and now they start believing in that and start doing more. It's a mindset. It definitely is a mindset, a little bit of a shift. But frankly, every customer, every leader that we speak to in operations, director level, VP level, they value that work. They value employees that take that step and they make the organization more efficient. And especially as things have been migrating to cloud, moving to cloud now, this is the default mode of operation. So I think for everybody that's feeling like a little uneasy, just taking that first step is the biggest step, and then after that, you're going to see all the benefits and value that you create and appreciation that you see in your organization for that.
Yeah, excellent. And then for larger organizations that have maybe more than bifurcated, but I mean, we use the sort of term automation archipelago, right? So like there's a whole bunch of stuff that they already have out there that maybe some of it is a decade or more old, right? They've just been, dragging it ahead, dragging it around with them and bringing all that stuff together. Like, is there anything like that can help those folks? Any advice for those folks out there to help them sort of start bringing all that stuff into a bigger island to help them sort of coordinate better and manage all of that stuff?
Yeah. I can start taking this one because this really addresses that last mile of the automation pipeline where you're in the environment. Now you're starting to coordinate actions between people, between other tools, between the actual machines and the environments. I like to call that the many to many problem. Right? You have many feeds, you have many teams and people, and you have many environments, and that creates kind of these pockets that are disconnected. So when you try to coordinate an action, it's not, in an enterprise environment, it's not necessarily simple. You need to have access to the environment. It needs to be secure. Perhaps you have 5 different environments that you need to operate on based on context. Your services deployed in different Kubernetes clusters, in different VPCs, in different clouds, right? So having a good map of that and access to these environments to be able to orchestrate that action is essential then to fulfill that promise of event-driven automation, at least the last mile of it, right? So I think, thinking more about not just having automation, but also having the way to orchestrate the automation based on context. And that starts from the event, through that initial processing of the signal all the way down to now taking action, the right place, the right time. And then, there's also a human aspect, right? Like if every team needs to have access to every environment and every tool, like you have this exponential complexity that you have to manage. And if you have an orchestration layer in the middle, that actually helps you then delegate access and then take action in context. So I think some of it is really taking a look at orchestration as a technology, that to drive that automation. There's not really other way to get around it, right? Those are my thoughts. I can probably speak days about this because a lot of the product that I manage is in that world of connecting the dots with machines. So, but yeah.
Frank, anything there?
I'd say I mirror a lot of what Peko is saying. I know the one thing that I've seen that really helps in that situation where you sort of have a lot of these different technologies, you're trying to adopt automation, is meeting people halfway, giving them the ability to orchestrate, as Peko was saying, but orchestrate using tools that they're comfortable with and they know of. One of the things that I find can really hurt adoption is if you go to a team, they've been working on something for 10 years, very old tech stack. When you go up to them and you say, new policy, you're obligated to change. Adopt this new tool or product that we bought. You have no choice. You're going to have a lot of resistance with that. And so being able to bridge that gap and saying, we'll use this tool as the orchestration layer. It's common, it's new, and then it will reach into your older tools, what you're comfortable with. That kind of helps, bridge that gap, get people comfortable with the idea of automation. And then, you have choices down the road. You could, go to them and get them to change their automation tools or not. It really depends on what your outcomes are. But being able to meet them halfway, I think does a lot to break down those barriers for adoption.
Yeah. Sam?
I think I risk sounding too much like a product manager, but I would say it's okay too. Like, it doesn't have to be everything at once. You can start with the problems that are most critical for your business and go from there too. Because again, it can be iterative. You can tackle things bit by bit. And like Frank said, meet people halfway.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's super important, is like, if you're in a heterogeneous environment, certain things are going to work better in certain places. You're going to have, if you've got Windows running around there, you're going to want some PowerShell versus the tools that you would use on Linux and Unix systems. And then you've got whatever you're talking to your cloud and your SDKs and all those kinds of things. And some folks are going to be already familiar with those and some folks aren't. So there's a lot of moving pieces that can possibly be in there, but also a lot of potential.
And I'm glad you mentioned the Windows Linux example. So from a responder, should I care that it's Windows or Linux, or should I care that I just need to take the same action on each of those, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you've got the same button, it says this, clean this disk location or restart this service. Do I care if it's, in system V versus whatever else? It could be on Unix and a system account, or however it's running under Windows, or how it's configured. I want the outcome. I don't necessarily care how it's done. So yeah, excellent. So as you've been talking to our customers and folks about some of these things, like, are there things that they're seeing, like, really, either maybe some really good early successes, or some things that they're just like, we have to get this interesting thing done? Or is there anything that kind of comes to mind that's been super interesting about the things that we've been talking to customers about?
I can take a stab at at least some observations recently. I think the problem is pressing, right? It's just the complexity that customers are dealing with these heterogeneous environments. Data center, cloud, edge. It's becoming, and also like the rapid pace of change. Like, all of a sudden you have this like complexity coming from rate of change and just the sheer volume of things that need to be managed. And as a result, like, it's just humanly not possible to manually do operations, right? You have to employ event-driven. Now, the next interesting thing again is now into each of these pockets. There's kind of different patterns there, but lately it's been really interesting where the point of contact devices are just mushrooming. And
Okay.
right? So like, you go to a store, you try to order something, well, it doesn't work. I'm trying to print pictures, it doesn't work. So just that area of reliability of edge is really starting to hurt businesses that rely on that. And it's event driven is a kind of, it's almost both a no-brainer as well as a necessity. It's like, we can't deploy an engineer in each of our locations, right? I have to be able to respond to that immediately. So that's been an interesting area of how this technology gets deployed.
Yeah, that is interesting.
One that I'll say, it's less than sort of an interesting implementation, but an interesting thing I've noticed, certainly with event-driven automation recently, is how much it's getting used that people may not know about. So you'll talk to folks in the field, you'll talk to customers, and they'll say, event-driven automation, that's like super advanced. We're not there yet. But fortunately, we get data, so I can actually see who's using it. And it's funny where you'll see the same sorts of patterns with folks where they go to start to adopt it, and their curve of adoption looks like this. And so we're seeing a lot of that nowadays, where this really consistent pattern of week 1 you'll see a couple of triggers, week 2 a couple more, and then by month 1 or 2 it just sort of like skyrockets. And there's this really neat exponential growth that we continually see as folks deploy it, both their own growth, and then also when you look at how many people are deploying it, that too is really, really starting to skyrocket in ways that, I wouldn't have expected it to take off the way it did. I think certainly nowadays there's just a lot of pressure to look for automation. And it's just fascinating to me, like how rapidly it's being adopted. And as I said, once people adopt it, how rapidly that adoption is spreading.
I think that all makes sense. I think, and it's a really good question. What I would highlight is a little bit of a different end of the spectrum, which is one of the problems we just hear again and again from our customers is it's hard to get the right responders involved. When something breaks, when a component has an issue, it's sometimes easy to tell where the issue is, or it can be easier to tell where that issue is. But then knowing who to get involved is often one of the really hard next steps. And I think that this is really where event-driven automation can help you all succeed. And there's two things that I think are really important, and we've seen a lot of success with some of our customers who are trying to address this issue. And both of them revolve around adding structure. And so I think getting the right service topology set up and getting that information really with a clear structure and consistent structure is where you can get a lot of benefit. And then the other one, and this is an age-old issue that's hard, is having naming patterns. You'll see all different things that come about when it comes to naming and service naming and team naming in that organization. But adding the right patterns and making it so you can have the right structure helps with both the automation side of that, as well as actually the manual steps that happen. And that's, again, where I would call out, not all automation has to be full automation. You can look towards some of those human in the loop actions where you're helping support people when they're responding to the incidents. And that, again, gets back to how does your naming structure support them? How does the service topology support them? And then where can you fully automate using true event-driven automation where you're routing to the right services and teams?
Awesome. Well, that was all my questions. So for folks out there, if you're still listening on LinkedIn or Twitch, I can see your comments from there if you have any questions before we wrap up. Is there anything else folks should know as they're looking at maybe going down this journey, maybe applying some of that maybe they've got, human initiated automation pieces that they'd like to turn into event-driven automation? Anything else that we want to talk about there? And we do have one question from Elaine. They ask, how are you enabling the event monitoring? Is it a new task or a new plugin? I think that was from when we were talking about some new features that were coming. Frank, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, it's a good question. So this is actually a feature that's in early access now for our AIOps products. If anyone's interested, we're always welcoming new EA customers. But it's a feature that we're calling variables that allows you to now start basically caching event data as it's processed over time and monitoring it for use in event orchestration. So as events come in, you can define what sort of events you want to look for, what sort of criteria they match, and then how data gets stored, what format, how it gets tracked, and then how it gets used later on. So using this feature, you can now monitor those events coming in and then build logic around different sorts of event patterns, event data. A really fun use case is like you could run diagnostics and then send that information back into PagerDuty so you can like populate variables based on the outputs of diagnostics and have that impact things going forward as well. And so it's a new feature. Like I said, it's in early access for AIOps, but that's a new capability for us to do event monitoring over time.
Excellent. Yeah. And folks out there, you want to sign up for early access, it's at pagerduty.com/early-access there at the bottom of your screen. And you can sign up your account to get that. And you're going to come back on the stream at some point and like show us all about it, right? Like, just
if you'll have me. Yeah.
Always. You're always welcome. 100%. Right. So, well, excellent. Well, this has been super great. There's a lot here for folks to think about, a lot of potential to mitigate risks, save time, save person hours, reduce mistakes and potential problems when they're not only responding to incidents, but doing their regular work. There's a lot of potential here for folks to improve their practice via incorporating some event-driven automation into their workflows. So, it's been great. All right. Well, thanks everybody out there for watching. If you are watching us live and you'd like to see this again, it will be on YouTube. That will be its permanent home. So you can find us at youtube.com/PagerDuty, and all of our streams are there. So thanks for joining us today, guys.
Thank you, Mandy. Really appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me.
All right. We'll be back on the stream tomorrow with Terraform time at 4 p.m. Eastern, and I will be back with you on Friday for the How To Happy Hour at 4 p.m. on Friday. So in the meantime, we'll wish everyone an uneventful day, and we'll talk to you later. So thank you.